Joining us today is a man who has worked behind the scenes for many years as a writer and producer. His credits include the shows Nash Bridges, Standoff, Life, Hawthorne, Crash, The Walking Dead, and Damien. If you're following along with this podcast, you'll know him as the writer of the episodes The Spread and Cupid and Psycho, and the co-writer of The Quick Fix and now Homewrecker. He would go on to write another 11 episodes for The Shield. Glen Mazzara is on the Shattered Shield with us today. Thank you for joining me, Glenn.
Great, thank you.
Today I've got some questions about the writing process, really, for The Shield and in general, and some conceptual questions about Season 2. But first, I'd like to start at the beginning. How did you get involved with The Shield?
Well, first of all, let me say thanks for having me on and
Sure.
for being such a fan. We really appreciate this, and it's exciting to see that work we did so many years ago has a new life. So thank you for
talking
about the show.
I'm enjoying it.
So I am originally from New York, and I was a hospital administrator, and I was trying to learn how to write, and to be a TV writer. And my very first pitch meeting in Hollywood, really my first professional meeting, was at Nash Bridges. And I walked into the room, and there was John Wirth, who's gone on and run shows like Hell on Wheels, and Carlton Cuse, who famously did Lost, and Sean Ryan. And, my pitch meeting was a disaster, but they liked me and brought me back, and I sold an idea. And I was, that was a very heightened sort of comedy adventure type show, sort of like Lethal Weapon was what I think people were going for. And I have a brother who's a cop, and I grew up in New York, and so I had a grittier sensibility, and I was always pitching, stuff that was just too dark for CBS at that time. So Sean and I were the junior writers. He was a story editor. I was a staff writer. So the staff writer is the lowest level of TV writer on the hierarchy.
Okay.
And story editor and executive story editor are the next, level. So I think he was always one level above me. And then he left that show to go work on Angel for a little while, and I stayed on the show. And then I ended up going through a period of unemployment, like all writers do. And Sean and I remained friends. His daughter and my son were born in the same year, and they're now both in their freshman year at college. That's how long I've known the guy.
Yeah.
And he's just always been a great friend. So when the Shield got picked up, it was called The Barn, and was picked up as a pilot, he invited me to set. I met Michael Chiklis on the day he was shooting the famous, I'm a different kind of cop, scene and everything. And Sean said, I'd love for you to work on the show. And so the show got picked up, and a few hours after it was picked up, he called me and said, listen, I need to, hire veteran writers first, but I definitely want to hire you, so why don't you come to my house tomorrow and help me start breaking episode 2? So he and I were working out of his house for a couple of weeks as he was hiring the rest of the staff.
Interesting.
And then the rest of the staff started. The show was picked up end of August 2001, and obviously 9/11 happened a few weeks later. So when we started the room, it was really all people could talk about, and it was just, an insane time. But I met Kurt and Scott Rosenbaum and Jim Manos and Kevin Arcadi and me. I think that was the freshman class of writers, and Sean obviously. And we had Randy Huggins, who's now gone on and become a showrunner in his own right. He was our writer's assistant, and we just started all working together.
Okay. I know that you started, like you said, as a writer, and you would end up being an executive producer for the show. Going into Season 2, had that started to, did that start to conceptualize that you would move to that role?
No, what happened was, so I started on the show as a story editor, second level up, or maybe executive story editor, I forget. And I had an advantage. I had two advantages, and one that I knew Sean. See, everybody else was meeting Sean as the boss, and Sean's a great guy and very approachable, but he was trying to figure out how to manage the show, how to be a showrunner, and all of that. And I thought of him as my friend. Obviously, we were friends. So so I also had management skill from working in the hospital. So I could read a political situation, or I could make suggestions on how to manage things. So I would, but because he was my friend, I didn't want to call things out in front of the writers, or
Right.
I respected his privacy. So I would constantly say to him, "Hey, could we step into your office? I want to give you a heads up. Here's the situation. Here's something I heard. Here's something I'm thinking about, or whatever." And after a while, he started to trust me and give me certain responsibilities. And so second year, we had a writer, Reed Steiner, who was a great writer, and he was from Nash Bridges. So he came over. He was a senior writer to both of us, and we really respected him. He's a tremendous talent and great guy. So he was running the room on season 2, and season 2 was probably our worst year in the sense that Sean was going in a lot of different directions. The bar was set very high. Chiklis had won an Emmy, and how do you top that? You know what I mean? Yeah. And so when we were really panicked, I think, and just so the scripts were late. We were. I mean, there was I think one time I worked 21 days in a row.
Wow.
Without a day off, and you would constantly come in at 11 o'clock a.m. and then kind of work all day, and then we would have dinner. And Sean had the business of running the show, dealing with actors and production and location problems and all of that. So he couldn't settle think creatively about the show until after dinner. So now we're pitching out stories where we had worked on until, midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And then he would say, "Okay, but we're late with the script. We need this written by noon tomorrow."
Yeah.
So we were just working around the clock, and I think what happened was it was just a lot. It was just really hard. Kim Clements had joined the staff by then. She was fantastic, and it was really grueling. I mean, there was one time that I had one day off. I was playing with my kids, and we were in a park or whatever. And the next night, I guess I must have stepped in poison oak or something. And the next night, I'm at the board about 10 o'clock at night writing something on the board in front of the writers, and I'm like just breaking out in hives.
Yeah.
And I went across the street to a pharmacy, bought something, came back to work. The next day I went to the doctor, and I even came back to work after that. Like, you just wouldn't think about taking a day off. We were so far behind. So then going into season 3, I said, look, let me use some of my skills from the hospital to organize the show so that we're not working around the clock like that. And Sean didn't respond to that. He didn't like that idea because he thought I was going to try to impose a schedule that was going to not allow for the creativity, for the storm that we had going on, because that was leading to good material.
Yeah.
And I managed an emergency room for 8 years, and I said, no, I'm used to chaos. I can just kind of share information and organize this. So he started to trust me. I remember I asked if I could run the room season 3, and I had to go to his house and kind of pitch this, and he didn't respond. And so I didn't know if that meeting went well or if I was going to be fired or what happened. And then we went into the room on the first day, and he said, oh, Glen's going to run the room when I'm not here. So that's when I heard of it. Okay, so I guess I was like, I guess I'm running the room. So that was great, and that was fun, and I have a great relationship. I'm, very close to all the writers and stuff, so that was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I would also, because I was close to Sean, if I pitched something and he didn't like it, he was comfortable kind of teasing me or saying that's not what we're going to do, but I didn't really get hurt about it. You know what I'm saying? I never felt like my spot on the show was threatened. I was going to lose my job if I, screwed up a pitch or something like that. Yeah. So that's the way it kind of happened. The other thing was that there was one time that he had some administrative stuff. He had something management to say. There was something going on that he wanted me to make an announcement at a table read. And I made that announcement, and people started seeing me as, oh, Glen has a direct pipeline to Sean.
Right. Okay.
Sean, like, in a way, Sean was always accessible, but sometimes he was more accessible than others.
Sure.
So sometimes people would come to me to talk about their characters or to talk about their issues or to talk about concerns about the show, writers, directors, actors, and then I would sort of workshop it and then present it to Sean with possible solutions.
Got it.
So I started. They actually called me Uncle Glenn on the show because people would come into my office and sit on my couch, and it was like, you know, Lucy and Charlie Brown. Like I just gave out free therapy advice, and I talked people through because it was a difficult work. It was a difficult show to work on. It was great. It was a beautiful experience, but because you had to really go inside dark parts of your mind and your soul, and you can't do that without it raising anxiety. We had to live in an unhealthy place, and people needed sort of like, you know, support. That, you know, because we were really going into dark places on that show.
What was Sean's level of involvement in just the writing process of each episode? Was he more of like a hands-on kind of person, or did
Yeah. Sean was an incredibly hands-on. So what would happen is we would work up ideas and pitches and things just like you would in any room. And then you would kind of put up the beats on the board. You would put up the scenes, and very often we would break out the scenes according to different storylines. And The Shield was complicated because usually you have an A storyline, a B storyline, and a C storyline. Sometimes we went up to like G and H. You know what I mean? We had so many. Yeah. We were just packed in those things. And then Sean would come in, and so we would have the different storylines written on the board. And so the Vic storyline was always the A story, right? Mm-hmm. Except for the one episode of Kavanaugh. Right. We switched it and we made Kavanaugh the A story. I think that was the only time we switched. So that was or Vic Strike Team or what have you. So we would always break that story first, and that was the biggest story. And that could have probably 26, 27 beats. And then you would have the B story would be 14, 15, 16 beats, and maybe that was Dutch Claudette or what have you with David, you know. And then so the A story would be A1, A2, A3 up through A27, and then B1, B2. And then Sean would come in and he would look at the board, and he would have the assistant sit up there, and it was like a mathematical equation. So he would say, okay, here's the order of the scenes. A1, A2, A3, B1, A4, A5, B2, C1, and we would just write that equation down. And then it was brilliant. I think was an economics major, so he's using that math part of his brain. And then we would have to sort of smooth out some of the things. So we would combine scenes, like say there's a scene in the motor pool, and then the character would walk into the bullpen, and then we would connect that scene. So now we have to write some connective tissue, you know?
Sure.
And then we would kind of take that and comb through it, you know, and then one of us, usually the writer whose name was on the title page, you know, the writer of the episode would comb through it. Sometimes I would comb through certain aspects. I could talk about that in a sec. But we would kind of, you know, massage it and make it a unified script. Then you would turn that over to Sean, and Sean would do his changes. And Sean would go through, and starting on page 1, he would rewrite the entire script. And some scripts he had to rewrite more than others. Sometimes he wouldn't, you know, and it was always just what he was feeling, what he thought was great. And he had a connection to the show that I've since become a showrunner, and I didn't understand this at the time. You know, you're cutting the show. You're dealing with actors. You're dealing with the executives. You know, you have, as a showrunner, you have an affiliation or a relationship to the material that the writers don't. Like, the writers are very focused on the story segment, but they may not, you know, understand the editing. I think eventually we did, but Sean, you know, was the master of that show, and he you know, rewrote a lot. I remember there was one episode of mine that he didn't do a heavy rewrite, and I was shocked. I was like, well, what's wrong with the episode? It's so bad he can't fix it or whatever. So I know him, and he's gone on to, you know, run many other shows, and he's always very, very involved and has a very strong creative voice. He's a force of nature.
Yeah. I noticed in season 1, you are the sole credit for the spread in Cupid and Psycho. Mm-hmm. And then in Season 2, you co-wrote a lot of episodes, two of them being with Sean that we've seen now, The Quick Fix and Homewrecker. Do you prefer to write episodes by yourself or co-write them? And what are some of the different challenges and benefits there?
I remember that became that I started to be a facilitator in the room. And I couldn't go off and write entire scripts just because I couldn't be out of the room for that long.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I sort of became a voice, like the person who's running the room, who's in the room, ends up tracking a lot of material. So if you find the scene and you say, okay, that's great, in episode 4, we need to set that up in episode 2, I would have to call the writer of episode 2 and say, work this in or something like that. So I ended up doing a lot of that. So it was just easier. And Sean also, even more so, couldn't take time to go off and write solo episodes.
Yeah.
It takes you out of the rest of the creative process. So it was just easier for us to just kind of work on those things. I think what happened, I enjoyed it. I was used to writing with him. We wrote on Nash Bridges together, so we had the 2 years of that training. And writers did contribute scenes to every other script. I contributed a lot of the, how the first act always has some kind of scene like, hey, we got a hit on the license plate, let's go talk to the victim's girlfriend, like that kind of scene. I would end up doing a lot of that stuff, because if we were behind, then the writer on the episode would, they'd want to do the money scenes at the end, like the beatdowns or the emotional payoffs in the clubhouse or that kind of stuff. So I would do a first draft and then turn it over to that writer, and people did that for me, and we did it for each other, and people, it was very fluid. So that was kind of maybe a secret of the Shield, but I can't say those are the scripts with my name on it are solely my work. Everybody contributed, and I believe I contributed to other people's scripts. And people didn't care. I mean, we were possessive and we were competitive, and it was a tricky place to work. But ultimately, nobody wanted to contribute to a bad episode. Like, there was never an episode of The Shield where people said, oh, well, it is what it is, or it's good enough. People fought for everything that you saw on screen. And I have, never seen a dedication or love from an entire cast, crew, and writing staff like I did on The Shield, and so that was really a group effort, and it's very, very different than other shows.
When you were coming into season 2, you said that you guys were going in or Sean was going in a lot of different directions. I noticed, well, anybody would notice that Armadillo Quintero is the first time you had what I call a supervillain on the show. He was a multiple episode villain. Mm-hmm. Do you remember who created his character, and who was the first to bring up that idea, or do you remember who brought that idea up of having somebody continually be on Vic's case?
If you ask every writer will say they pitched it. I do think I may have said, there's a new guy in town who's kind of unifying this, because it felt like an outsider would, like Vic had controlled Farmington.
Right.
So we needed somebody from outside. So who came up with the name Armadillo? I don't remember. That feels like maybe a Kurt thing. What was his last name?
Quintero?
Quintero, yeah, I think I may have picked up Quintero somewhere. I think he had a brother, Navarro, right?
Yeah,
I
definitely. Rivera.
Yeah, I definitely did that one. And I remember the burning tires was something that I learned in high school, like the necklaces that I had learned in high school, that that was a thing that was done to torture people in South Africa.
Wow,
so I remember taking that from the news and like, wow, that's really horrific or whatever. And I could tell you a story about how we filmed that scene. But, I think we all contributed to it. I certainly remember, Kurt was the one who had like this guy's walking around in his underwear. So, everybody contributed, I mean, everybody was, everybody was insane on that show. I think one of the things that was really scary is when we were doing that first execution where he's burning somebody at the stake, right? We were filming that late at night. That was one of many scenes that was really disturbing that to the crew. We were shooting Friday night into Saturday, and we had to get it before the sun comes up. So you have a stuntman who's dressed in latex, and he has a mask, and he has gauze, and he has all this flammable stuff, and he actually has a tube running out of his mask so that he can breathe, that he can get some air, right? And the guy is not getting enough oxygen. The stuntman is actually not. This is before the fire, and he's actually not getting enough oxygen. But the tube is so long, it's in the shot. So someone else from the stunt team takes out a pair of garden shears and starts to cut the tube, but the guy is losing oxygen. He thinks like this guy's cutting his breath off. So he grabs the garden shears and starts wrestling with them, and then everybody jumps in, and all of a sudden we've got this pair of garden shears like flailing around like a knife, and you're just like, oh my god, what's happening, And it was like the guy couldn't breathe, and we had to like rip the mask off and everything, and are you okay? And they had to like kind of redo his thing, but the guy almost suffocated right in front of us. That's and intense. Then was sort of hallucinating that somebody was cutting his oxygen off. So it was scary,
Yeah.
That was really like I was like, what is happening here?
That's insane.
Yeah.
During that actual scene, you have the song for the first time, Quentin KL by Whitehouse. You hear it. You hear it in this episode. You hear it in Dead Soldiers, and you hear it in Greenlit. It's played probably more than any other song I can think of in the show repetitively. Was there a significance to that song?
No, I think it was just that it was supposed to be his, just kind of pull up a thematic connection, just to kind of play as a chorus when that character is there.
Okay.
And Sean picked all the music with I mean, maybe Kurt picked a few songs for his stuff, but for and maybe Scott Rosenbaum. I never bothered picking my songs. I just let Sean pick. And a lot of the songs were, the Shield was incredibly cheap. You couldn't do the Shield today. The Shield was incredibly cheap to do those first few years. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like there still are not 1 hour episodes being done. It was like the cheapest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And so it was, what was affordable on a very tight budget.
Sure. Getting into Homewrecker, the episode was directed by Scott Brazil, and his name comes up a lot when I'm researching the show. What do you have? What memories do you have working with him?
I have a lot. Scott was the co-executive producer at first and then executive producer, and he was a veteran director. He came out of the Bochco camp, and he had been, a guy well-established in Hollywood, and he knew how to shoot the show on a tight budget, and how to really maximize our locations, and he was really the one, I think Clark Johnson kind of created the handheld, documentary-style thing, type of filming, but Scott really knew how to produce the show. He was a brilliant producer. He did a lot. He did most of the finales. He did most of the premieres. He did a lot. And so since those were big episodes, I became his writer. I think he directed 11 episodes or 13 episodes, and I was his writer on set for all but 2 of those. So if he did 13, I was his writer on set for 11, or if he did 11, I did 9, something like that, right? And he and I spent a lot of time together. I mean, we introduced, Armadillo. We introduced Glen's character. We introduced Anthony Anderson's character. We did a lot of that stuff together. And so he was just wonderful to work with, and I learned a lot from him. And then he ended up, he had ALS, and he, contracted that or got that or it came out. I'm not, we started showing signs, and then and it was debilitating him over the course of maybe 2 years. He got progressively worse, and he confided in me what was going on, and didn't want people to know and stuff, and he passed away. I mean, I was with him his last day of but his last day at work, and then it was a Friday, and he, passed away on a Monday. And Sean and I remember all the writers just sitting in the room, just dealing with that. And then Sean and I went over to tell people and that he wasn't going to make it. And then by the time we got back, we got a call, and it was really, really difficult. It was really incredibly difficult. And I think his death was part of the reason I left the show in season 6, because I just couldn't. I was spent. I felt like creatively I was running over the same old ground. I didn't feel like I was contributing what I could. And I was just also, I look back, I think I was also just depressed and in pain. I really felt like I lost a mentor. So it's difficult to talk about it now.
Yeah, he's definitely one of the names that I remembered seeing a lot when I was watching the show for the first time when it was airing.
Yeah, he was just a great director, great shooter, but also a great friend, great person, and I just we all had a lot of love for him and miss him very deeply.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
They have at the beginning of Homewrecker it's another one of those. You guys did a lot of sensory shocking intros to your episodes. Your cold opens. This one's the battered women's shelter where there's 6 or 7 people dead. Cupid and Psycho, the guy's burned up in the truck and he opens his eyes.
Yeah, those are both mine.
Yeah. Were those a conscious effort?
They're horror. They're horror movies.
Right.
They're horror movies. I like horror. I've gone on. I did Walking Dead and Damien and I guess that's coming out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I remember. I'll tell you, like, this is going to sound insane, but it actually is that kind of dark humor from the Shield. But I remember thinking, well, if the guy's coming in and he's going to slaughter, the guy's coming in to get his girlfriend, right, or his wife or whatever, right? So I wanted him to come in with a piece of rebar. And I felt like, well, what if there was a woman, maybe an old lady, and he just like rammed the rebar right through her chest and like pinned her to the wall or something like that, or we see that she's even stuck to the floor or something. And Sean was like, no, that's like, we're slaughtering all of these people. We don't need to do this. And I was like, you're getting soft. I was so mad. I was like, wait a second, hold on a minute. We just set somebody on fire. He's like, yeah, but that guy was a bad guy. This is an innocent woman working in a shelter. I was like, no. And I just remember there were these issues where Sean had more sense than the writer, than not just me, but the other writers. And somebody would pitch something way over the top. And Sean would say, absolutely not. You're like, no, that's not entertaining. Nobody wants to see that. It's gratuitous or whatever. And we would think he was ruining the show, that he was soft and selling out. And I remember, like, okay, you've ruined the show. You've ruined my career. The only way to do this is to have this lady pinned with a piece of rebar. And I'm going to stand by that. I'm going to say no. I don't know, but I just remember that was like the big argument on that. It was just one of those things where I was just feeling exceedingly violent.
It became legendary. You would always have these crazy opens. It's funny to hear that story.
Yeah,
you thought he was going soft, because I still to this day I look at the intros of those shows and be like, geez, you still.
Yeah, so I look at that intro and I see it as soft.
Yeah.
Okay, so it shows you what a disturbed person I am.
Well, like I said, Walking Dead, right?
Yeah. I got to take out some frustration there. So, yeah.
The last bit I want to get into is Connie Riesler's character, Jamie Allman's character, Connie.
Mm-hmm.
Did you bring her back specifically to take her out? I guess is my question. Because she had been gone since Dragon Chasers, and it seemed like her story was over, and she comes back and she's clean, and you could almost feasibly see her being on the show. This is
She's killed in Homewrecker? She's killed in Homewrecker?
She's killed in Homewrecker, yeah.
Right, okay. So here's the story with that, okay? What happened was we were breaking the story, and we had this hostage situation, okay? And I'll say that when we shot that, I felt like that was a highlight of my career, and I still do, that we shot a classic hostage cop situation. Like, I was very, very happy, and that kind of was one of those days where I felt like, hey, it's great to work in Hollywood,
Yeah, it was on your list.
Yeah, it was really fun, and Scott did a great job with that and everything. And so what happened was we had this hostage situation, and we would always write ourselves into the corner. And that's the one I think where Vic rips down the shades. He moves
Yes.
and he pulls down the shades and the snipers. Okay, I had never seen that because usually cop, we were very cognizant of cop tropes, and usually in most cop shows, and you can see them on networks today, a cop talks to a hostage taker, and for some reason they put down their gun, like, I'm not going to shoot you, put down the gun, and then, and trying to get the other guy to put down the gun, and then the guy makes a move, and then somebody has to shoot him or something,
Sure.
right? You know what I mean? So the cop in that situation is hesitant to shoot the suspect, right?
Uh-huh.
No, that's not how cops are trained.
Okay.
That's not how cops work.
Yeah.
Cops are like, this guy's a threat. He's about to use deadly force. He requires deadly force to eliminate that threat. If you can talk him down, great. But if this guy if deadly force is a legitimate option for cops, and a cop is not going to put down their gun to a guy who's using deadly force, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Why would you risk your life to trust a guy who's saying he's going to shoot people? That makes zero sense. So Vic certainly would have no qualms about having this guy killed. So that thing with the blinds and everything, that we felt like that was a good thing. So now we had this issue about Connie, and I don't remember exactly what the issue was, but I think we were actually breaking the scene. We were actually standing at the board, and all the writers were there, and we got information that the actress's agent was being difficult and saying that, and not her, but that the agent was requiring, an extravagant amount of money.
Okay.
To come in because they felt like it was a successful show and all of this. And I was like, and they were, and it was like, okay, well, that solves that problem. We'll just have a bullet killer. And then, because we can't afford it.
Yeah.
So why that was a mistake, and I think creatively it worked, but why it was a mistake and what I've learned since is that sometimes agents make requests that the client doesn't know about.
Okay.
So we killed off this actress who was a tremendous gift to the show and added so much. And when I told her, I was like, well, you know, this is what happened. And she was like, I had no idea that happened. But now we've got the thing, and we've got, it's written, and we're about to shoot it and all of that. And what I think, this was part of our inexperience, because we were young writers and producers, that sometimes when a deal's going to bust, you got to go back to the client. And I've done this with writers and actors and say, hey, your agent's saying this, and I'm going to kill off your character, and I've killed off a lot of characters.
Yeah.
I'm going to kill off your character. Is that what you want? Because I can't make the deal that you're asking for. You see what I'm saying? So
Gotcha.
There was both, creatively, it was a home run, but she was an incredibly talented actress, and I felt like we missed her afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, we missed her presence. So I think there was a dog trainer, right? There was like a woman who was a canine unit.
Yes. Yeah.
Right? That storyline never really popped, and it was supposed to, we were trying to show that, there were several times that we tried to introduce a love interest or someone else for Vic to kind of show other sides of him.
Sure.
That Connie brought out. And I think we did it with various degrees of success. Nothing about any of the actors who played those roles or whatever, but I think just as writers, we knew we had something with Connie and we lost it, and so I think we felt it. So if I could go back and do it again, even though I love that episode and I do think it was right to kill her in that episode, I may want to go back and spend another week or two trying to figure out, do we really need to kill her in that episode?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because I think that actress, I felt like she was one of the best actresses I ever worked with. I thought she was terrific.
It's just like you say, like it works wonderfully in the episode. When I saw it, I couldn't believe it. But like you said, you could easily, have gone back and decided that you wanted to keep her on, and she could have done a lot of those stuff. So I think either way you go, you're gonna, those are decisions that you have to make when you're doing them. I wouldn't.
Yeah, it was a hard decision, and I remember we and the thing was once you made a decision on a show, it was just like, okay, now what happens?
Right.
That train was moving so fast.
Yeah, I had two questions that were just kind of bonus because I wanted to get your opinion on what Vic's relationship was with Connie, because my broadcast partner seems to think he didn't care and he just cared about the kid. I don't get that vibe at all.
No. I would disagree. I think he did care about her. That's why she exists, because it's surprising, and that was based on a real thing. That when Sean was doing his research, he knew that there was a cop who was doing these horrible things, in Rampart, but he actually had some sort of affinity for a prostitute. How complicated that person was, and it was something we used. And I think, Connie was a lot of fun to write, and I think, the Dragon Chases episode was fantastic, and I think, Scott Rosenbaum and Kurt Sutter wrote her very, very well.
Yeah. Who was your favorite character to write? If you had one. I mean, you don't have to. I'm not putting you on the spot. I was just see if you had something.
You know what? I'm going to say it was Vic. I'm going to say it was Vic. I loved writing for everybody, and I did write for everybody. One of the things was coming off of Nash Bridges. Sometimes Carlton liked to organize his writers where, somebody would write a particular character or a particular storyline or something like that. And I was worried, because I was coming off of a period of unemployment, I was worried if I only wrote one character on a show in which nobody was safe before, people were using that term regarding TV. Yeah. If I wrote a particular character and that character got killed off, then I was going to be out of a job, right?
Yeah.
So I decided I was going to write every character. And I do have a lot of affection for writing Claudette and David and Dutch and everybody. But I really did love writing Vic, because Vic was just fun, and Vic was, he, to me, loved the game.
Right.
A lot of people talk about Vic's own brand of justice, but then why is he corrupt? Why is he participating? I think Vic loved, and Chiklis played it so well, that he loved when you knew he was guilty, and he knew you knew he was guilty.
Right. Yeah.
But you couldn't prove it, and he just there was a twinkle in his eye, and he would just smile and be like, "What are you going to do about it?" He loved that. He was addicted to that, and I always felt like it was about some evil game this guy was playing, because he got a rush out of getting out of tight spots.
Right.
You know what I mean?
There was a line that when he's talking to Aceveda in a couple episodes back about the drug thing, and he had convinced Julian not to give testimony, and he just looks at Aceveda as like, "Sorry, you got your headlines messed up," and he just looked as happy as he could be.
Yeah. And and Michael, a lot of the Shield success has to go to Michael. Because, Michael was the star of a previous show, The Commish, and I remember he never sat us down. and gave us notes. He never said, what are you guys doing? This is, and a lot of people were like, okay, can we do this material? Like, this material was not being done. Like, and we were totally untested. Even on The Sopranos, David Chase was an established showrunner. We were, nobody. Sean was a mid-level writer from Angel,
Yeah.
So it made no sense for us to do it. And Michael got us breathing room. Michael backed us, and he said, let these guys figure it out. Let these guys do this. This is what it is. And I remember, and he loved it. He just loved what we did. Going back to that drug scene you're talking about, where that's like, that's in 1, right? And season
yes.
1, and he's flushing the stuff and everything, and he gets bleach and cleans out the guy's nose, right? So I remember my pitch, going back to what we said earlier, my pitch was, I don't like this idea with the bleach. I think he should cut the guy's head off and hide the head, and then we could figure out what to do with the head later. And that was maybe like the first time I pitched something that people were like, okay, how evil are you? And I was like, oh, and so then I was on set, and Chiklis was like, this is great, I love it. And I go, well, here, I think the show's going soft, because I feel you should have decapitated.
I bet you the networks loved you guys.
Chiklis just looked at me like I was insane. He was like, what? I was like, yeah, I don't know. I hope it works with the bleach, but the decapitation, I'm telling you, it's a loss. I think it hurts the show, and not to do it. And he just looked at me like I was insane, you know. Yeah. But that was the kind of show where you could have those debates, you know.
Yeah. Well, Glenn, I want to thank you for coming on.
Oh, my pleasure. I hope that was what you wanted.
Yeah. You said to me earlier that you thanked me for being a fan. Well, allow me to thank you guys for creating a masterpiece, because here we sit 16 years later, and people will ask me, what's your favorite show? It's The Shield, hands down.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.